recite 3 loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنام محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. صلى الله عليك يا مولاي يا رسول الله. صلى الله عليك وعلى آل بيتك الطيبين الطاهرين. ما خاب من تمسك بكم، أمن من لجأ إليكم سادتي. سيدي يا أبا عبد الله، يا صاحب المصيبة الراتبة، ويا باب نجاة الأمة، لأندبنك صباحا ومساء، ولأبكين عليك بدل الدموع دما. يا ليتنا كنا معكم فنفوز فوزا عظيما. قال تعالى في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قال فبعزتك لأغوينهم أجمعين إلا عبادك منهم المخلصين. آمنا بالله. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. One of the cornerstones of our madhab is the belief in the isma of the Ahlul Bayt alayhum salam. And not only the Ahlul Bayt, but also the prophets and the awsiya. This concept of isma is one we find that only atba' al-madhab, al-imami believe in. The reason I say this is because when you analyze the other school of thoughts within Islam, you find that they have many different interpretations when it comes to understanding whether or not, for example, our holy beloved Prophet was infallible or not. These madahib that I refer to are, of course, the madahib al-kalamiyya and not the madahib al-fiqhiyya. For our brothers from different school of thought, they are al-asha'ira and al-mu'tazila. And for us, we are al-imamiyya. And al-imamiyya believe that the Ahlul Bayt, salamullah alayhim, without a doubt, were infallible, ma'soomeen. Now when we open this discussion, we find that there are many different ways that we can come to this conclusion. Some are through adilla aqliya, intellectual means, some are through adilla naqliya, through religious text. Before delving into different riwayat, before delving into different intellectual means, one way that we can find this concept of infallibility is through the Holy Quran. In the ayah that we mentioned, the accursed devil Iblis speaks to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, فَبِعِزَّتِكَ لَأُغْوِيَنَّهُمْ أَجْمَعِينَ. He says that all of mankind, I'm going to bring them towards the darkness. But here there's an istithna. He says, إِلَّا هُ عِبَادَكَ مِنْهُمُ الْمُخْلَصِينَ. As we are aware, the Quran is a book with high eloquency. The most beautiful, eloquent book in the history of mankind. And one of the miracles of the Quran is this high level of balagha. That every single term, every single word, every single mufrada that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses in this holy book has a specific meaning, a secret meaning, a hidden meaning that if we contemplate, we'll be able to understand. Sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses words with very, very little difference, but their meaning might be huge to signify something important. And in this ayah we find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the word mukhlasin to prove a point to us and to Iblis. One thing for us to always keep in mind is the story of Iblis is a very scary story for us to think about our own lives. Why? Because he had two traits that made him fall. Sometimes we talk about ilm and being knowledgeable and how that will help us. But we know that Iblis also had ilm. We talk about a lot of different traits. Worshipping, for example. But we know that Iblis also worshipped Allah. So what are the two things that were his downfall? And two things that are scary for us to think about and we need to remind ourselves constantly. The first is arrogance. For an individual to be arrogant is something very, very scary. Because you might have so many good traits. You might be doing so many good things in your life. But if you're arrogant, this is one of the ways that you may fall in life. And we found that one of the ways that Iblis fell was through arrogance. The second is pride. Be careful of pride. People who are prideful, not only will they hurt themselves, but they'll hurt people around them. We find that Iblis, it wasn't enough for him to be arrogant and confront and challenge Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But his challenge became even greater because of his pride. When he promised Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that everyone else in the world, I'm going to also make them fall. And we find sometimes we fall into this trouble, we fall into this problem when we get in trouble, for example, if we have a lot of pride, that we want others to fall with us. It's not enough that we fall into a trap. So these are two things that I always tell the beloved mu'mineen around the world, to keep an eye out with yourself when you're doing muhasabati nafs. Remind yourself constantly to stay away from arrogance and to stay away from pride. Now, going back to the ayah, we call the individuals who Iblis himself knew that he would not be able to make fall into his trap, al-mukhlasin. Now what does this word mean? What's the root of this word? Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala choose this word and not another word? The root word for the root word in Arabic is khalas. The word mukhlasin comes from the word khalas. Khalas means what? Pure. Something that's 100% pure. Like for example, when you go to the market, you might find that sometimes your mother looks for honey and it says 100% pure. Asal khalas, everybody knows. The New Zealand, these days they buy from New Zealand, they love it. See? Why do you go for something pure? It means that it has no imperfections. It has nothing else apart from what it says. And here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to say to us is that these individuals that Iblis will never be able to lead astray are completely pure and there is no room for imperfections. So when we go back to the bahth, to the discussion of isma, of being infallible, we find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts the stepping stones for this discussion in this ayah. He uses the word mukhlasin to show us that these individuals, number one, are pure, with no imperfections. Now another important thing to denote from this ayah is we said that the Quran has the highest level of eloquency and balagha. And one of the miracles of the Quran is this. Now here, a question is usually asked. Why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describe these individuals as mukhlasin and not mukhlisin? What's mukhlasin and what's mukhlasin? What's the difference between these two words? In actual fact, they might mean the same thing, but one small harakat gives them a hidden meaning that's a lot greater for us to understand. And the mufassirin of Quran give us a small example. They say, had Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala used the word mukhlasin, it would have denoted to us that these individuals were on a pathway in search of purity. So that they haven't been there yet, they haven't gotten there yet. But the Quran uses al-mukhlasin because it is ism maf'ul, not ism fa'il like mukhlasin. And that denotes to us that these individuals have already been purified by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has shielded them from impurity. So the ayah uses the word mukhlas because these individuals are already pure. They're not on the journey to become pure, they've already been purified. And this understanding that these individuals have been purified from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, keep it in the back of your mind because we're going to come to it towards the end of our discussion. Here another question might pop up into your mind. You might say, Zain, how do you know that the individuals that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said are purified are in fact actually humans? Why can this ayah, for example, not be referring to the angels, to the malaika? Here we go back to a very important discussion, a bahth known as Malaka wa Adam. Malaka wa Adam. Do angels have the capacity to sin, or do they not have the capacity to sin? From the get-go we know that these individuals do not have the capacity to become impure. That in their essence, in their that, they are always pure. That they don't have the malaka of being able to sin. So why would this ayah not mention them? Because it only makes sense to mention something that is purified if it has the potential or capacity or possibility to not be purified. So if I was to tell you, for example, I saw a rock. You say, okay, you saw a rock. I went to Madani Cardiff Bay and I saw a nice rock. And I told you this rock is blind. You would probably say, Sayid, you need to go to the doctor. I think there's a problem with you. What do you mean the rock is blind? From the get-go, the rock doesn't have the possibility to see. Sahih wa la? And just like that, the angels don't have the possibility to be impure. That the ayah is relating to mankind. Why? Because we have what? Choice. We can either be good and try our best to live a pure life, or we can fall. So this ayah is referring to us, Zain. Now here, another question comes to the minds of the people. They say, it's clear to me, the ayah is referring to these individuals. And it's clear to me that it's not the angels. Iblis wants to cause all of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creations to sin, apart from those who have this status of purity, Zain. But what are the qualities that lead to a person having this status? Yani when I say, for example, Fulan is from the Mukhlasin, what does this individual have that I don't have? What is the remit of this individual that he was able to reach such a high status? We go back to the ayah, we find that again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us all the information we need. When Iblis mentions these individuals, what does he call them? He says, ibadah. He uses the word ibad, from ubudiyya, al-abid. That a person is submissive to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What does this indicate to you and me? That if a person is submissive to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is considered from the ibad, he has the potential, the possibility, the capacity to reach this high level known as being from the mukhlasin. So the first thing that's important for me and you to denote to ourselves is that if we want to reach a high level, if we want to purify ourselves, the first thing that we have to do is be submissive to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is to be slaves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we all know, in our fitrah, in our innate nature, mankind always has to be a slave to something. You find one person is a slave to money. One person is a slave to their desire. One person is a slave to something else. How do you achieve true freedom? Not freedom that they talk about in the secular sense. La. It's by removing yourself from all these things and becoming a slave to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But nothing else matters to you. Everything else is not important. The only thing that's important is your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we find the main quality of the mukhlasin are these individuals who have ubudiyya. And ubudiyya has many secrets to it. Ubudiyya has many levels to it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, some of the individuals that He allows to enter heaven, He says first you need to enter the status of ubudiyyah. You need to become one of the Arba'een. The ayah says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Ya ayyatuha an-nafsu al-mutma'innatu, irji'i ila rabbiki radiyatan mardiyah. What does it say after that? Fadkhuli fi ibadi. The first level is you need to become one of those who is deemed submissive to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you are, wadkhuli jannati. That you're able to, through this trait of being a slave to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of freeing yourself from everything else, reach the highest level of heaven. So now we understand the status of al-abd. Here we need to ask ourselves, why is ubudiyyah so important in this bahth, in this discussion? How does it go hand in hand with an insan who is mukhlas? How does it go hand in hand with the crux of the mawdu', which is infallibility, isma? One of the secrets of the word ubudiyyah that is not said out loud, is like there's a hidden meaning, is full ubudiyyah. What do I mean full ubudiyyah? I mean it's not part-time, I want to be religious, and another time I want to go somewhere else. One day I'm in the Husayniyah, the next day I'm somewhere else. La, ubudiyyah is full ubudiyyah. That at every single moment of my life, what did we mention yesterday? God-centricity. That I see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in everything that I do. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala plays a role in everything I do. And I've submitted to Allah in everything that I do. Full ubudiyyah. Just like when you work full-time, not part-time. This is full ubudiyyah. At every moment of your life, you have to be an abd. I'll give you an analogy. One of the ulama of akhlaq mentions this story. He says there used to be a rich man. He wanted to bring a servant for his house, to look after the house. So he went to a distant land, chose an individual and brought him back home. Now this individual, he comes from a different country, from a different culture. He has different understandings. His life is completely different. So he takes him to the house. The first thing he says, because this is a very nice individual, this rich man, he's a very nice man. He says, where would you like to sleep? This is your room. Would you like me to get you a bed? Would you like to sleep on the floor? How do you like to sleep? In your culture, I don't know how they sleep. He says, my master, wherever you tell me to sleep, I'll sleep. He says, okay, fine. He says, what do you like to wear? How do you like to dress? I don't know how you like to dress. In your culture, how do they dress? What do you want me clothes to bring for you? He says, my master, whatever you tell me to wear, I'm going to wear it. He says, fine. The last question, what do you eat? You know, maybe you like spicy food, I don't have spicy food. Maybe you like food that's not spicy, if I put you spicy, you're going to get ill. What kind of food do you like, Nathalie? He said, my master, anything you tell me to eat, I'm going to eat. At that moment, this individual began to cry. He said to him, my master, why are you crying? He said, because you taught me a very important lesson. What lesson was this? You taught me what full ubudiyyah looks like towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That if I want to be an abid of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is how I have to have my relationship with Allah. Everything He puts in front of me, I have to take it with thanks and pleasure and accept it. That's what it means to be submissive to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's the hidden meaning of the word ubudiyyah. And we find that if you become a slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the first thing that happens towards your purity is what? You leave no room for anything else to come inside you. Why do we say that there's a correlation between al-abd and al-mukhlas? We said this person, al-mukhlas is pure, comes from the word khalas, no imperfections. When your life is God-centric, when you're a slave to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but there's no room for anything else to come into your life. Everything will have something to do with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And some of the ulama mention a nice thing. They say Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam, his oldest son is Ali al-Akbar. So why do we call him Abu Abdullah or Aba Abdullah? Where did this nickname come from? They said because Imam al-Husayn, through his actions, he's like a father teaching his children. That he's teaching all of us how to be slaves towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how we need to be an abid of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he is Abu Abdullah, the father of those individuals who submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is something very important for us to remember on these nights of Arba'een, to remember in the months of Muharram and Safar, that Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam in every moment of his life submitted to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. At not one moment he said, my child is more important to me than Allah. My money, my land, my women, everything for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at every moment of his life. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. You all know the famous story of Bishr al-Hafi. Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam passes by a house. He sees loud music coming from the house. The slave of that house comes out to throw, for example, the garbage out. He asks her a question. He says, this house belongs to a free man or a slave? She said, of course it belongs to a free man. It belongs to Bishr. He says, I know he's a free man. She says, what do you mean? He said, because if he was a slave, he wouldn't do all of this haram. He would be submitting to his Lord Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when she goes back into the house, Bishr says to her, why did you take long? She says to him, I saw Al-Kadhim alayhi salam, and he said 1, 2, 3. He began to shake, he began to cry. He ran outside of his house with no shoes on. That's why he was known as Bishr al-Hafi. And he asked Imam to forgive him. And he joined the Imam, he became one of his companions. That he understood that if I want to reach a high status, I have to be submissive to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when an individual reaches this status, something comes hand in hand with this status. In Arabic we call it lawazim. So what are the lawazim of being an abd? Of being mukhlas? Some people think that isma or infallibility comes by itself. The reason that it comes with an individual such as Imam al-Hussein or Rasulullah is number one, that they're mukhlaseen. Number two, that they're abd of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And with that, it means you have to be a ma'soom. You have to be immaculate. You have to be infallible. Why? Because we said that New Zealand honey, why do we buy it? Because it's 100% pure, there's no imperfections. Here's the same thing. If there's one imperfection, no longer a mukhlas. If he's not a mukhlas, what happens? He falls into the trap of shaitan. What did the shaitan say to Allah? That these individuals, I cannot come near them. Saying, who are these individuals? Those who have to have isma, who have to have infallibility. And this is one of the ways that we find out that those individuals with high taqwa are those individuals who have a level of isma. And is this level, because unfortunately some of the Muslimin, it's too difficult for them to understand isma. As soon as you bring the concept of isma, they're like, no, maybe, I don't know, I don't think so. Because the truth is, what does isma mean? When you go back to the Arabic word, it's translated as al-imtina', that when an individual stops themselves from doing something. Then, I ask you, all of us here, don't we have some form of isma? And before anybody gets excited, I'm not talking about the isma of the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. But in the level that, if I was to give you a cup and tell you, Yaga, this is poison, drink it, would you drink it or not? Why? Because isma is based on knowledge, on ilm. And these individuals have that ilm from their ubudiyyah towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that they have this high level. But even me and you, there are some things that we don't do. Why? Because we have the knowledge that if I drink poison, I'll get hurt. So I don't drink the poison. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, when he looks at a sin, he sees the negative effect of that sin. So do you think he'll go to sin? No. Every single thing that's wrong, when these mukhlaseen look at these acts and realize the negative implication of these acts, do they go towards them or do they not? They don't go towards them. Why? Because they have knowledge of them. Just like you have knowledge that you shouldn't drink that poison. So this concept of isma isn't something foreign to the mind. It's not something foreign to our intellect. It's something acceptable. But when we say tamma, like for the Ma'soomeen, unfortunately, the enemies of the Ahlul Bayt, the Mughradeen, they're like, no, this can't be a fact. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us so many clear indications of Isma in the Quran. This is one of them. This is one ayah of many. People who are interested, who are interested in this bahith, there are 14 different means of proving Isma. And they're mentioned in a book by an individual called Sayid al-Kharrazi. The book is called بداية المعارف الإلهية في شرح العقائد الإمامية. And this is a very complex book. But in this book, he mentions 14 different ways that we can prove Isma. So for all of us in our faith as Imamis, if we get attacked, if somebody comes and asks us, why do you believe Ahlul Bayt are Ma'soomeen, 1, 2, 3, know that your madhab has the answer, our ulamas have given the answer, and there are some things that we cannot refute. And one of those things, one of those concepts, is the concept of Isma. And for those who want to know, how do we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen the Ahlul Bayt for this? How are they the misdaq of this concept? What did we say that al-mukhlasin is? Those who are purified? Is there another word for purity? Think with me, is there another word for purity? There's one other word that I remember for purity, which is something that's tahir, sah, yola. And what's the clearest indication in the Quran? Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. إنما يريد الله ليذهب عنكم الرجس أهل البيت ويطهركم تطهيرا. These are things that are undeniable. But unfortunately we find that the enemies of Islam not only deny the status of the Ahlul Bayt salamullah alayhim, but went through great lengths to bring pain and misery to the Ahlul Bayt. Some things that are undeniable for us, that are as clear as daylight, the enemies tried throughout the history to lie, to burn books, to cover up truths, so that we won't sit here in Cardiff 1400 years later and remember the 40th of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. But Sayyida Zainab salamullah alayha made a promise. And if Sayyida Zainab makes a promise, do you think that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would break the promise of Sayyida Zainab? She said, He will never erase our memory. لا تمحو ذكرنا. And after 1,400 years, in Cardiff there is majalis, in Alaska, Canada, even in Japan there is majalis. Everywhere you go, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam is remembered. No matter what they do, no matter what they say, no matter how they try, they'll never be able to remove the dhikr of Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad.
When the captives left Sham, the women of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, and they were making their way back to Medina, in some narrations it mentions on the same year as they are going back towards Medina, they come to a crossroads. Salamullah alayhi, Imam al-Sajjad asks Sayyida Zainab, he says, we are at a crossroads now, O Ammah. Would you like to go forward to Medina, or should we take this road and go towards Karbala? She says, oh my nephew Sajjad, take me to my brother Hussein. I want to go to Karbala. So they turn the caravan down the road and they start going towards Karbala. When they arrive, they see one of the great companions of Rasulullah. They see Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari. He is sitting by the graves crying. When he sees Imam al-Sajjad come close, he rushes to the holy Imam and throws himself at the feet of the Imam. He says, Sayyidi wa ya Sayyidi wa ya Mawlai, Azzamallah laka al-ajr. What has transpired here in Karbala? Oh my Imam Sajjad. show me whose grave this belongs to. Where is each individual buried? The narrations mention that Imam al-Sajjad, he would take Jabir from grave to grave. He would take him onto the plains of Karbala. He would show him where everything would have happened. He would take him next to a palm tree. He would say to him, "Oh Jabir, under this palm tree they would hit Hassan's son Qasim with a sword. And over there is where they trampled the body of Ali al-Akbar." He says to him, "Come with me, Ya Jabir. I want to take you by the river." He says, "Why by the river, Sayyidi wa Mawlai? What happened by the river, Ya Sajjad?" He said, "By the river Abbas, Abbas, Abbas. By the river my uncle Abbas fell." He said, "How did Abbas fall? Your uncle was a titan, he was huge, he was tall, he was strong." He said, "Oh Jabir, when Abbas fell, he had no hands. He would fall straight onto his face." He would say, "What else happened in Karbala?" He would take him to a small hill. He would say, "This is Tel Zainabi." He said, "Who was here?" He said, "My auntie Zainab. She would stand on this hill. She would look down and see Shimr sitting on the chest of Hussein. أين المنادي وحسينا وسيدا وشهيدا." Jabir sits with Imam al-Sajjad. He goes to the grave of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. He says, he sees Sayyidah Zainab by the grave. She is crying. She is next to her brother. She says, "Oh brother, I have brought your head back. Oh Hussein, you do not know what they did to me in Sham. You do not know what they did to me in Kufa. We have been captives for so long, Ya Hussein. Before I go to Medina, I had to come and see you." Imam al-Sajjad Salamullah alayhi returns the heads. He buries each head next to each individual until it is finally the time to bury Abu Abdullah's head. They begin to cry when they see the grave. Why? Because they know that under this grave was Hussein's body, trampled by the horses. Sayyidah Zainab alayhi salam cries, Jabir cries, Imam al-Sajjad cries. They bury the head of Hussein and they make their way towards Medina. ألا لعنة الله على قوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا على محمد أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين. Brothers and sisters, please raise your hands in dua. We have a lot of people who have hajat. We have a lot of individuals who are ill. I would like all to please pray for the respected UK scholar Ayatollah Sayid Father Milani, who's fallen very ill and is in dire need of your du'as. And remember all of your brothers and sisters, the mu'mineen. We say, Allahumma bihaq Fatimata wa abiha wa ba'luha wa baniha wa sirr al-mustawdi' fiha. Ya Allah, shafi al-murda, Ya Allah. اقضي حوائج المحتاجين يا الله. عجل في ظهور صاحب العصر والزمان يا الله. ولا أرواح المؤسسين ولا أرواح موتى المؤسسين والحاضرين وشيعة أمير المؤمنين. رحم الله من يقرأ الفاتحة تسبق الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد.